What if everything you were taught about money was designed to keep you comfortable enough to never ask the one question that actually matters? For over a century, ordinary people have been told that paper currency is safety, that the numbers in a bank account represent real, permanent wealth, that inflation is just a minor inconvenience, not a warning sign. But behind closed doors, currency dealers, central bankers, and precious metals experts have understood something very different, something they rarely say out loud, because once you understand what is really happening to the money in your wallet right now, you will never look at a dollar bill the same way again. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why history's wealthiest families made one decision differently than everyone else, a decision most people are only now beginning to make, before it may be too late. Welcome back to Precious Metals Intelligence, the channel dedicated to helping thoughtful, informed viewers understand the forces quietly shaping the value of their money, their savings, and their future. Whether this is your first time here or you have been with this channel for years, thank you for making the time to sit down and think seriously about these issues. Before continuing, if you find value in this kind of careful, no-nonsense analysis, consider joining this community by subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel continue producing thoughtful work like this. And out of curiosity, this channel would love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Please share in the comments below. Every day, millions of people trust a piece of paper without ever asking why. They work for it, save it, and plan their whole future around it. But almost no one stops to ask a simple question: what actually gives this paper its value? The answer is trust, nothing more. A dollar bill is not backed by gold. It is not backed by silver. It is backed only by a promise made by a government that people will accept it as payment. That promise has worked for a long time. But history shows it does not work forever. To understand this, one has to go back to 1913, that year the Federal Reserve was created. Before that point, the United States dollar was tied directly to gold. A person could take paper money to a bank and exchange it for real physical gold. The paper was simply a receipt for something solid and real. Then things began to change, slowly at first, then faster. By 1933, the government made it illegal for citizens to own large amounts of gold. By 1971, the dollar was completely cut off from gold altogether. From that moment forward, the dollar became what experts call a fiat currency, money that has value only because a government says it does, not because it is backed by anything physical. This might sound like a small technical detail. It is not. It is one of the most important financial shifts in modern history, and most people were never taught to notice it. Once a currency is no longer tied to something real, it can be printed in unlimited amounts. And when more money is printed, each existing dollar becomes worth a little less. This is not a theory, it is basic math. If there are more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices rise. Wages struggle to keep up. Savings slowly lose their power to buy what they once could. This process has a name: inflation. And while modern institutions describe a small amount of inflation as healthy or even necessary, history tells a very different story. Every fiat currency ever created, not most, not many, but every single one, has eventually lost significant value over time. Some collapsed slowly, over decades. Others collapsed suddenly, within a few short years. But the pattern always repeats. This is where the story becomes personal, not just historical. Because right now, in wallets and bank accounts around the world, millions of families are holding onto currency that is following this exact same pattern. They may not feel it happening day to day. Inflation rarely announces itself loudly. It works quietly, a little at a time, until one day people look back and realize their money buys far less than it once did. Consider a simple example. Decades ago, a small amount of paper currency could buy a full week of groceries, a nice meal, or even help cover rent. Today, that same amount barely covers a small snack. The paper itself did not change. The number printed on it did not change. What changed was the trust behind it, and the sheer amount of it that now exists in the world. This is the illusion most people never question. They assume that because a currency is official, because it comes from a government, and because everyone else accepts it, it must be safe. But safety and popularity are not the same thing. Something can be widely accepted and still be quietly losing value every single day. Throughout history, one group of people paid closer attention to this pattern than almost anyone else. Those who work directly with money and metals for a living, currency dealers, bankers, traders, people who saw, up close, how governments behaved when economic pressure increased. They noticed something the average person rarely considers, that paper currency is a promise, and promises can be broken, diluted, or quietly weakened over time. This understanding did not stay hidden by accident. It stayed hidden because most people simply never had a reason to question the money in their own pocket. Life moves fast. Bills need to be paid. Trust in the system feels easier than doubting it. But history does not care about comfort. It only cares about patterns. And the pattern behind fiat currency has now repeated itself so many times in so many countries across so many centuries that it can no longer be dismissed as an accident. The real question is not whether this pattern will continue. History already answered that question long ago. The real question is what happens next, and who chooses to pay attention before the pattern repeats one more time. Most people think of inflation as a number on the news, a small percentage, something economists talk about once a month and then everyone forgets. But inflation is not just a number, it is a process. And once someone understands how that process actually works, they start to see it everywhere in their own life. Here is the simple version. A government or central bank can create new money almost out of nothing. It does not need to dig up gold. It does not need to earn it through trade. It can simply add new currency into the system through policy decisions. When this happens, the total amount of money in the economy grows, but the total amount of goods, services, homes, and food does not grow at the same speed. When more money chases the same amount of stuff, prices go up. This is not opinion. It is one of the oldest and most consistent lessons in economic history. And the tricky part is this: the people who receive the new money first often benefit, but the people who receive it last, regular workers, retirees, and everyday savers, usually feel the cost the most through higher prices, without ever seeing the extra money themselves. This is why inflation is sometimes called a silent tax. No politician has to vote for it publicly. No one has to sign a bill that says your savings will be worth less next year. It simply happens in the background through the slow expansion of the money supply while daily life continues as normal. To understand how powerful this effect becomes over time, it helps to look at real numbers instead of theory. Decades ago, a modest amount of savings could comfortably support a family for a long stretch of time. Today, that same amount, unadjusted, would barely last a few months. The dollar amount on paper never changed. What changed was its purchasing power, the actual real-world ability of that money to buy food, shelter, and basic needs. This is the part most people miss. They look at their bank account and see the number growing slightly through interest, and they assume they are becoming wealthier. But if prices are rising faster than that interest, the truth is the opposite. They are becoming poorer in real terms, even while their account balance goes up. It is an illusion of progress, built on top of a currency that is quietly losing strength every year. Central banks are aware of this. In fact, most modern central banks openly target a small, steady rate of inflation, often around 2% per year. On the surface, this sounds harmless, small, manageable, but compounded over 10, 20, or 30 years, even a modest yearly inflation rate can cut the purchasing power of savings dramatically. What feels like a small, quiet erosion in any single year becomes a massive loss when measured across an entire lifetime of saving and working. This is why many economists and historians describe modern currency systems as a long, slow leak rather than a sudden flood. A flood is dramatic and impossible to ignore. A leak is quiet. It can go unnoticed for years, even decades, while it steadily drains value from anyone holding onto paper currency without protection. The danger is not that people fail to work hard or save responsibly. Many people do both faithfully for their entire lives. The danger is that the tool they are using to store that hard work, paper currency, is not designed to hold value over long periods of time. It was never meant to. Its entire structure depends on continued trust and continued expansion, both of which quietly work against the saver over time. This raises an uncomfortable but important question. If paper currency is structurally designed to lose value over time, why do so many people still treat it as a safe, long-term store of wealth? The honest answer is simple. Most people were never taught otherwise. Financial education rarely explains the mechanics behind money itself. People are taught to earn money and save money, but rarely taught to question what that money actually is, or how it behaves over the long run. Understanding this mechanic does not require complicated math or a background in economics. It only requires stepping back and asking a basic question that most people never take the time to ask. If this system has quietly repeated the same pattern in every fiat currency throughout history, why would today be any different? That question sets the stage for the next part of this story. Because while paper currency has followed this same pattern again and again, not everyone has been fooled by the illusion. Throughout history, a smaller group of people made a very different choice with their wealth, and that choice has quietly protected families for generations. While most people trusted paper currency without question, a smaller group of individuals throughout history chose a very different path. They were not gamblers. They were not chasing quick profits. They were simply paying close attention to something most people ignored: a long pattern of currencies rising, weakening, and eventually disappearing altogether. This group understood a basic truth. Paper money is a promise. Gold and silver are not. A piece of paper depends entirely on trust in a government and its ability to manage an economy responsibly. A piece of gold depends on nothing at all. It does not ask for permission to hold value. It does not need a signature, a policy, or a central bank standing behind it. It simply exists, the same as it did thousands of years ago. This is not a new idea invented in modern times. Ancient civilizations, long before banks or paper money existed, already understood the value of gold and silver. They chose these metals for very practical reasons. They were rare, but not impossible to find. They did not rust, rot, or break down over time. They were easy to carry, easy to divide into smaller pieces, and instantly recognized as valuable almost anywhere in the world. In many ways, these ancient civilizations were solving the same basic problem people face today: how to protect the value of their labor and their time. Throughout history, wealthy families who survived economic collapse, war, and currency failure often shared one common trait. They held a portion of their wealth in something physical, something that could not be printed, inflated, or erased by a government decision. While paper currencies came and went, and sometimes losing most of their value within a single generation, gold and silver quietly remained useful, tradable, and valuable on the other side of that collapse. This pattern repeats across many different countries and many different time periods. Currencies have failed in different corners of the world for different specific reasons: war, mismanagement, political instability, or simple overprinting. But in almost every case, those who held physical gold or silver were able to preserve a portion of their wealth through the chaos, while those holding only paper currency often watched their savings disappear almost overnight. This is not a story about panic or fear. It is a story about historical pattern recognition. The families who protected their wealth generation after generation were not necessarily smarter or luckier than everyone else. They simply paid attention to a lesson that history has repeated many times. Currencies are temporary, but certain physical assets have proven again and again that they are not. It is important to understand that this strategy was never really about becoming wealthy overnight. It was about preservation, about making sure that decades of hard work were not quietly erased by a system built to slowly lose value. Gold and silver were never marketed as a way to get rich quickly. They were treated instead as a form of financial insurance, something held quietly in the background, ready to hold its ground when paper currency could not. This idea also extends beyond raw metal itself. Throughout history, rare coins and collectible currency have carried an additional layer of value beyond their metal content alone. A coin minted during a significant historical moment, or produced in extremely limited numbers, often carries meaning and demand that goes beyond its weight in gold or silver. This additional layer of value, built on rarity and history, has allowed certain coins to become even more valuable over time than their metal content alone would suggest. What makes this even more interesting is how often these decisions were made quietly, without public announcement. Wealthy families rarely explained their reasoning in public. They simply acted on it, generation after generation, treating physical assets as a long-term anchor in an otherwise uncertain financial world. This raises an important question for anyone watching today. If this pattern has repeated itself so many times throughout history, and if a smaller, quieter group of people consistently made the same protective decision, generation after generation, what did they understand that most people still overlook today? The answer becomes even clearer when looking at this issue from a different angle, not through the eyes of historians or economists, but through the eyes of someone who deals directly with these transactions every single day, someone who sees, up close, exactly how people react when they finally understand what their money is quietly doing behind the scenes. That perspective is where this story turns next. There is one group of people who sit closer to this story than almost anyone else. They are not economists writing reports from a distance. They are not politicians speaking in general terms on television. They are currency and precious metals dealers, the people who sit across the counter day after day, watching real families make real decisions about real money. A dealer sees something most people never see. They watch an elderly customer bring in a small bag of old coins, unsure if it holds any value at all. They watch a young professional walk in for the first time, quietly worried about the future, asking careful questions about how to protect their savings. They watch these moments happen again and again, year after year, and over time, a clear pattern begins to form. Dealers notice that the people who come in earliest, before a crisis, tend to make calmer, more thoughtful decisions. They are not panicking, they are simply paying attention. On the other hand, the people who arrive later, after inflation has already damaged their savings, often carry a different kind of energy: regret, urgency, a wish that someone had explained this to them sooner. This is one of the quiet truths that experienced dealers rarely say out loud in public settings. Not because it is a secret, but because it is uncomfortable. Most financial institutions are built around encouraging people to hold cash, hold debt, and trust the current system without question. A dealer who spends decades watching real transactions unfold sees a very different picture. They see currency slowly losing strength in real time, reflected in the questions their customers ask and the reasons they give for walking through the door. Many dealers also hold a personal position that reveals a lot, without needing to say a single word. It is common knowledge within this industry that a large number of dealers personally own and hold physical gold and silver themselves. They are not simply selling a product. They They are participating in the same strategy they recommend because they understand, better than most, what is happening behind the scenes of modern currency. This is an important distinction. A dealer is, of course, running a business. They understand this clearly and they are not shy about it. But unlike many other industries, their personal financial behavior often matches their professional advice. When someone spends their career watching paper currency lose value while physical assets hold steady, it becomes difficult to ignore that pattern in their own personal life as well. Experienced dealers also understand something else that rarely gets discussed publicly: the difference between panic and preparation. They often point out that the goal was never to frighten people into rushed decisions. The goal was always to help people understand a pattern early enough to make calm, informed choices, rather than reactive ones made out of fear after the damage has already occurred. This is why many dealers describe their role not simply as sellers, but as educators. Before any transaction happens, a good dealer spends time explaining the difference between bullion value and collector value, explaining historical patterns of currency failure, and helping customers understand exactly what they hold and why it matters. This is not a sales tactic. It is, in their experience, the only responsible way to help someone make a decision that could affect their family for generations. Over time, this perspective becomes difficult to unsee. Once someone has watched hundreds or even thousands of customers walk through the same emotional journey, confidence, doubt, discovery, and eventually clarity, the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. It becomes instead a quiet but powerful confirmation of everything history has already shown, repeated one customer at a time. This is the perspective most people never get to see directly. Not from a headline, not from a textbook, but from years of standing in the middle of real financial decisions, watching real families discover, often later than they wish they had, what currency dealers have quietly understood all along. And that understanding leads directly into the final and most important part of this story, the part where all of these lessons come together into a single, clear conclusion.